We are interviewing Richard A. Lipsey. The date is January 18th, 1978. The time is approximately 20 of 12. We're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's time for the sporting goods store, place of business for Richard Lipsey. Also present, the staff members, Andrew Purdy, Donald A. Purdy, Jr., Mark Flanagan. Mr. Lipsey, you are consenting that you are being taped at this time?
That is correct.
Okay.
Now, let me ask you fellows a question. Before we start, and the only thing that I question about this conversation is that, and I don't even remember, I don't have a copy of it, I can't tell you what it is, but right, as you know, I was the aide to General Wheel, and as such we were responsible for all the funeral proceedings, arranging it. We did everything from getting the Irish Guard there on time to the whole bit. And I did watch the autopsy, or the majority of it. I wasn't in it 100% of the time, but I watched most of it. Afterwards, about a week or so later, I can remember signing a document in our office that came under some kind of Federal Secrets Act, and that we should not discuss any information. Take information and hold my calls. That we should not discuss anything of a secret nature that we felt was a secret nature, particularly anything about the autopsy, for a period of 15 years, I think it was. Now, are you excluded from this?
Well, it's our understanding that this is...
Not that I know, once again, not that I know anything, it makes a hell of a lot of difference. We were just told not to discuss it for, and I don't remember whether it was 15 years or 20 years, but I definitely remember signing something of that nature.
Well, it's our position that we are pursuing this investigation pursuant to the mandate of Congress, and that we hope that you will wish to participate and to give us the information in a voluntary manner.
Fine, no question about it. As long as you feel that in your position with Congress that anything I may have signed would be null and void as far as you're concerned.
Well, we are not in a position to give you legal advice as to what you should or should not do.
Yeah.
It is our position that there will not be any harm coming to you from cooperating with our investigation because of what you tell us. If there is something that's
I don't think. Well, I don't think there is. I think the point of it was obviously until the investigation. This time, this was the investigation hadn't even started. Was it really that we didn't talk to reporters or anything until the investigation on the assassination of Kennedy was complete? I personally feel that's what it was. So with that understanding,
if at any point you feel that there is a particular item which is a question of national security or something like that, please consult with an attorney.
I will, but there's nothing that I can tell you. I'll tell you that right now. It would have anything to do with national security.
Okay. And just for the record, to clarify what the orders may have been, were these signed? Remember who handed you the orders to sign? Were they orders?
I think it came through our chief of staff in our office. We were, the military district of Washington, and came through our chief of staff, who was a Colonel Holden. He got it from wherever. That's the best I can remember. Mm-hmm. Okay, no problem. Let's go on from there, and I hope I can help you.
Okay. Just preliminarily, we would like you to, we know your name already, but to also state your date of birth, and then to also go back to 1963 and what your general duties were, not in relation to so much that date, but just generally what was your capacity and as your assistant administrative agent and general manager.
Born on October 7th, 1939. In Selma, Alabama. I now reside here in Baton Rouge. I was, at the time I'd been in the service, I was stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and while I was there, several hundred lieutenants got interviewed for the job of didn't get interviewed. There were several hundred lieutenants there. I was one of several that was fortunate enough to get interviewed for the job of aide de camp to General Wheel, who was at Fort Pope. And I was selected as his junior aide at the time. I was a second lieutenant. Shortly thereafter, I don't think this was somewhere like in June. Shortly thereafter, General Wheel was notified that he was being transferred to Washington as commanding general of MDW. And his senior aide, as most generals do, want to take care of their aides, arranged for his senior aide to go to the Commanding General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And then he asked me if I'd like to accompany him to Washington, which I did. I was very grateful for to get out of Fort Pope. And when I got to Washington, General Wheel was due, 2 aides, a senior aide in that position. Washington, his aide could have been a colonel, and his junior aide could have been, I think, up to a captain. But General Wheel and I got along very well. I worked like heck for him. I respected the man. He's just a superhuman being. And we worked so well together, he just didn't get another aide. I was it. I took the place of both aides. And so I was General Wheel's aide while he was the commanding general of the Military District of Washington. And then also, for some special events, I served as a social aide at the White House, military aide at the White House at night on occasion. And then I helped, but the majority of my time was spent working day and night for General Wheel. Our duties, when we go into that, our duties basically, General Wheel's duties, he was being the senior military service in Washington. General Wheel was the senior, even though maybe not in rank on some occasion, he was the senior commanding general in Washington of a unit. And as such, when all the services worked together, like the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines worked together on projects, on receptions, when dignitaries came to the United States, on special events, on funerals, on parades, whatever, our service was the senior service, so General Wheel was always in command. That's how we had to handle the funeral, obviously, is when Kennedy got killed. All ceremonial aspects of military, anything the military has to do with in Washington in regard to ceremonies, is governed by, while all the services participate, it's run by the Army. And since General Wheel was commanding general and I was his aide, I was the detail man, and did a lot of his planning and helped him a lot. But the funeral was our project from the time we were in Washington when Kennedy was killed. I happened to be driving up to the general's house at 1 o'clock to pick him up to go back to the office, or thereabouts, a little bit before 1, when just had the radio on and heard the news flash the same time everybody else did in Washington. And the general had his radio on in the house, and we met at the door. I was going in, and he was coming out to tell him the news. He was, and we went immediately back to our office and got on the phone with the White House and got on the phone with the Pentagon and got on the phone with everybody else and immediately put what needed to be done into progress. And we met the body at Andrews Air Force Base. We had everything organized that afternoon. We had the Marines organized with their little honor guard. We had the men from Fort Myer, the 3rd Old Guard. The guys were like at Humphrey's funeral, the men that watched the casket. And the ceremonial troop in Washington had them all arranged. We met the body at the Andrews, put it in a hearse, and had a decoy hearse. So, because we knew there was a mob waiting at the hospital, Bethesda Naval Hospital. So, we got in a couple of these helicopters with our honor guard when they left and flew over to the hospital to get there before they did. And when they came in, one of the hearse went right up to the front door, and of course all the crowd rushed over there. And the one with the body in it went around the back to where the morgue was, and we unloaded it. We met them in the back and unloaded it right there to avoid, the news media and the crowd and everything else.
So the body was brought in the rear?
The body was brought in the back door, back right up to the loading ramp, right immediately next to the morgue. And we unloaded it there. And then Jackie Kennedy and her family and everybody that was, flown to Washington and come back with the body, they came in the hospital the front way and went upstairs to the presidential suite at the hospital. General Wheel went up to the suite to start to talk to Mrs. Kennedy and start making funeral arrangements with her, tentative funeral arrangements, mind you, because this is still very early, but seeing what they wanted done and getting some more wheels into motion because, we didn't know exactly what to do, and General Wheel told me, don't leave this body. You don't leave it. And so I did not, I didn't leave it, except for a while when he came back down and went in and spelled me for a little while.
I have a question. How did you go from Air Force One and
Mm-hmm.
how did you go from Andrews to Desert itself?
I accompanied General Wheel in a helicopter.
In a helicopter.
Yeah.
This is where a lot of bodies were.
Right.
And then you were there when
the body was in the procession, and going through Washington, but there were two hearses, and then one pulled right up to the front door, and one went around with the body went around to the back of the hospital.
Were you present when the body was taken out of?
I was standing there.
Brought into the wheel?
I was standing there at the airplane when it was loaded into the hearse, and then I was standing right there. I helped them unload the casket myself when we got back when we were in the hospital, right.
And then you accompanied it from that point on. You were
They never left it.
with the body.
Mm.
Okay, then I guess we can go on.
It's up to you to start asking questions now, or whatever
Might
you
go
want.
on and just tell us more.
Okay.
After you accompanied the body in.
Now remembering this has been, 14 years ago, but I mean, it's so little span of time, and I've, thought about it so often and recounted it to friends, all except for what I actually saw during the autopsy. We took the body, got it into the morgue. The only other person that I can remember, besides the doctors, and the team of doctors actually worked on the body, the only other person besides myself who were inside of the room watching the autopsy was Lieutenant Sam Bird. And Sam was the first lieutenant. I was a first lieutenant by that time. And Sam was the head of the old guard. I really can't remember the name, what they call them. The guys, he had 2 or 3 teams of fellows that were always responsible for the casket in any ceremony. General died, whoever did it. 3 of them march on each side of the casket, and then, enlisted men, and then there's an officer in charge. At all the important funerals, while I was there, Sam was always the officer in charge. So he was the guy that had men standing there all night long, ready to pick up the casket or do whatever's necessary, and, move it around. He was in charge of the detail, the guard the casket, formality type thing. But he was there in the room, in and out of the room, during the autopsy. So, anyhow, they brought the body in, took it out, laid it on the table. It was the first dead man I'd ever seen. And I'd never seen an autopsy. Well, obviously, I'd never seen an autopsy. So it was a pretty traumatic experience. Quite frankly, I didn't know I couldn't tell the general about going in the room. So I went, but I never realized that, seeing a dead man with rigor mortis, it just didn't seem like you were looking at a dead person. It was just an entirely different thing. It didn't bother me at all. I can remember that Sam went out during the ceremony and sent one of his men to get us some hamburgers. Because it was late at night, we hadn't eaten since that morning. And we sat in there and watched part of the autopsy eating hamburgers. So obviously, I can remember the smell of formaldehyde in there. It was the only thing that bothered me. The smell bothered me worse than the sight. So we watched the autopsy. Once again, the hours are a little fuzzy. The autopsy lasted approximately, if I'm not mistaken, approximately 3 to 4 hours. After that, we stayed in the room when the men from the funeral home came in, because General Wheel was still, by this time, General Wheel had come back down, but he was in and out and, still making a lot of arrangements, but he would come in occasionally for a couple of minutes and let me go out, whatever, take a little break. And then the men from the funeral home came in, and we sat there while they more or less put him back together and made the cosmetic, the different cosmetic changes that needed to be made on the body. And by that time, I had sent my car to the White House to get some clothes for Kennedy, and they'd come back. They'd called the White House and told. And
who's they? The company that drove.
General Wheel got some Kennedy family to call the White House, tell them what clothes. We sent our driver. We had a permanent car and chauffeur. And I had sent my driver to the White House. He'd gotten the...
Did he take anyone else with him? For instance, maybe presidential aides or agents or anyone else?
When he went to get the clothes?
When he went to get the clothes.
Honestly, could not tell you. No earthly idea. All I know is they sent him to the White House, got the clothes, and brought them back. And then I helped the men from the funeral home. There was only, at that time, by then I think there were only 2 of them in the room. And I helped him dress him, pick up the body. I helped him dress him and helped him pick the body up. I laid it in the casket. And as far as I know, I'm the last person to look at him because, I was standing there when they closed it. And then the story just goes on and on about the funeral. I don't really know how relevant any of that could be because that just was formal planning and carrying out the funeral.
Getting back to the beginning stages of the autopsy, or even before the actual autopsy began, do you recall when the x-rays were taken, the x-rays, the photos?
Yeah, well, as far as the exact x-ray was taken, no, I don't recall. I do recall the comments of the doctors, started examining the body before they did anything, looking at the body, looking at where the bullets had entered the back of his head. It was obvious that one bullet entered the back of his head and exited on the right side of his face and pretty well blew away the right side of his head. And then the other 2 bullets had entered at the lower part of his neck. And to the best of my knowledge, or the best of my memory, one had exited. The other bullet had entered from behind and hit his chest cavity. And the bullet went down into the body. And during the autopsy, this is the only part that I can imagine would be of any really, what I've told you a little bit right there, strictly confidential nature that was never written up anywhere, and I presume, am I right, this tape and this conversation is strictly confidential for, it's not going to be published, I guess is what I'm getting at.
It's not going to be published during the term of this committee. It's through 1978.
Well, okay. Well, is that, as far as I can remember, and I'm pretty positive of it, they never found the 3rd bullet. It did not exit the body. When they did the autopsy, I can remember first they cut the top of his head off, and then they cut his chest open, and they got all of his insides out. That was the only gory part. They took him out a piece at a time. They laid him up on, I remember, beautiful, clean stainless steel rack with water pouring over it all the time. I imagine, to keep it fresh or whatever. They did the whole autopsy, then they came back and sliced up all the organs.
Your slides?
I don't know what they were using them for. They were taking pictures of them, and they were examining them. I don't know whether they were taking them for records or not. I don't think the doctors, now to be perfectly frank, I don't think it ever entered the doctors' minds that they were taking pictures for a formal investigation. They were doing an autopsy, a complete autopsy. And whatever physical records that you maintain during an autopsy is what they were doing. I know they did a very thorough job, because every time one of them would say something, the other one would question it. I can remember they'd look at this one organ and they'd pass it around, and all three discuss it before they would go on to the next part. It wasn't one guy doing his operating on the feet, one on the chest, and one on the head. They did everything together and re-examined everything together. I remember that distinctly. They looked like one of the most efficient teams doing anything that I've ever seen. But anyhow, like I say, I can remember him lifting his chest cavity, and they had the top of his head off, and all the internal organs out. And I can remember him discussing the third bullet, first, second, third bullet. The third bullet, the one they hadn't found, their only logical explanation was that it hit him in the back of the head, hit his chest cavity, and then, like bullets will do, I'm sure you're familiar with that, when you shoot somebody, no telling where the bullet's going to end up. Probably hit his chest cavity, and it could have gone all the way down into his toe. It could have just hit and gone right down into his leg or wherever. But I don't think, to my best of my knowledge, they ever found the third bullet. But
did they find any other bullets?
This is what I'm getting back to. I don't know whether they found bullets or whether they found just particles of bullets. I don't think they know. I don't think they found any whole bullets. But boy, that is just strictly speculation on my part. I remember they were bound and determined to find that bullet because it didn't have an exit mark. But I don't think they ever found the bullet. So the bullet was somewhere in his body, obviously.
And you said entered here, referring
to the lower back of the neck.
Back.
And from the angle they were talking about, it had to come from quite a height, because when they were looking and talking to each other, the angle where they were pointing it went in to where they figured it hit him. Where it would have exited had to be a down angle. And also, throughout their entire discussion, I never entered the discussion, neither did Sam Bird. We were just sitting there watching and listening. And we weren't asked for our opinions, and for good obvious reason. We would have known what we were talking about. So we never entered any conversation with the doctors or, were offered any information except what we heard them talking. And I don't personally think, personal opinion, from listening to the doctors, watching the autopsy, that there was any question in their mind that the bullets came from the same direction, entered, that all three bullets came from the same place at the same, time. They weren't different angles. They all had a distinct pattern to it.
Okay, getting back to the bullets themselves, not the bullets themselves, but the entrances. Could you just go over again the entrances as you remember?
All right, as I remember them, there was one. I remember them, there was one bullet that went in the back of the head that exited and blew away part of his face. And that was sort of high up, not high up, but like this little crown on the back of your head right there, 3 or 4 inches above your neck.
Okay.
And then the other one entered at more or less the top of the neck. The other one entered more or less at the bottom of the neck.
Okay, so that would be up where the crown, you mentioned the crown, which is
not the top of it. Yeah, the rear crown.
Where that point might be at the
Exactly.
Okay, at that point. Then one approximately several inches lower?
Well, not several, but 2 or 3 inches lower.
Still in the head, or what we would
closer to the neck.
Closer to the neck.
Yeah.
And then one in the neck.
In the lower neck region.
In the back.
Yeah, the very right. Right
That's
at the
purposes of tape.
Yeah. Right.
go back over things sometimes.
That's
You
right.
remember visual aids and you forget.
That's right.
Okay, and then according to the autopsy doctors, they feel the one that entered the skull, protrudes in the rear of the head, exited the right side
Right
of the head.
front. Face on the not the top, not the right top, the right front, the facial part of your face. In other words,
Did that destroy his face at all when you saw President Kennedy? Was his face distorted? So
the right side. Yeah. If you looked at him from the left side, you couldn't see anything. If you looked at him from the right side, it was just physically part of it blown away.
So that would be right.
Right behind the eye, more or less. Yeah.
On the eye. Was it all hair regions, or was it part of the actual face?
It was, to the best of my recollection, part of the hair region and part of the face region.
And just to follow up on this immediate point, after the embalming had been done and the morticians had finished preparing the body, and you viewed President Kennedy at that time,
right,
after he was dressed, could you see any damage or appear to be damage?
They did a beautiful job. He looked great.
So you really couldn't tell?
Oh, you could tell. Sure, if you got up close, you could tell, yes.
It was presentable in the sense that you would...
It wasn't presentable in the sense that you'd want to open the casket. But it was, they did a super job.
The point I guess I'm getting at is was half the face so completely blown away that
no.
You wouldn't recognize him.
No, not at all. Oh, no. He was 100% recognizable. I mean, particularly after they finished. Yeah, it wasn't that much damage at all.
And now, getting back, we just went over the three entrances of what the doctors stated were entrances. This is the base I can remember was Dr. Williams was the chief.
I met the doctors when we first started, and to this, except for when I read their names, I didn't know them then, I don't know them now on a personal basis, nor I've ever talked to them before, during or afterwards.
Do you recollect there were three?
Yes. And there was, the only thing I remember is at times there was another, it wasn't a doctor, it could have been a doctor, but I know there was an assistant or an aide doing things for him during different periods.
Getting back to the entrances, we just say the one exit you believe was in the right-hand side of the head. Mm-hmm. Now, what about the other entrances? What about the corresponding exits, if there were any? Just clarify that a little bit more. We're starting with the one that the bullet.
Like I said, the bullet that entered the lower part of the head or the upper part of the neck. To the best of my knowledge, came out the front of the neck. Mm-hmm. But the one that I remember they spent so much time on, obviously, was the one that did not come out. And there was a bullet, and that's my vivid recollection, because that's all they talked about for like 2 hours, was finding that bullet. Mm-hmm. And to the best of my recollection, they found some particles, but they never found the bullet. So, the pieces of it, traces of it. But to the best of my knowledge, and this is about one thing I definitely remember, is that they just never found the whole bullet.
What was it that you observed made you feel that it exited the bullet that entered in the rear portion of the head? The second bullet exited in the throat area.
Throat area, right. That's correct. Lower throat area.
Okay, was there markings there that indicated that the doctors come to that conclusion?
I saw, where they were working. Mm-hmm. And also listening to their conclusions.
Mm-hmm. And it's your recollection that at that time, all the doctors definitely felt the bullets came from one area.
Yeah, I remember they talked about that. It never seemed to be any doubt in their mind that bullets were coming from different directions at all.
I know it's been a long time, but do you recall any reasons they gave?
Because of the angle. I remember they talked about that's how they kept talking about the angle of the bullets, because the angles that they entered the body, and that's why I remember me measuring and doing all kind of things, and they turned the body up at one point to determine where that bullet that entered back here that didn't have an exit marker, where it was that bullet. And so when it got down to, where they thought it hit his chest cavity, then they started, when they opened him up, started looking in it here. And that's why I remember one thing they took, after they'd taken all the organs out, during the autopsy, had them sitting up there, they said, now let's see if we can find the bullet. They cut all those organs apart. And then I don't know what they did with them, but I remember putting them in some kind of containers. I don't remember, but I remember putting them in containers and saying, now we'll hold these for whenever.
Okay, just a minute. One of the tapes, Richard Lipsey is also taping this interview, and his tape just stopped. We'll turn off the tape for a minute until he can put his in. What time? My watch stopped, that's why I asked you before.
12:07. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, we didn't turn off the tape. I'm starting again.
All right, 12:07, starting again.
Okay, getting back again to the beginning stages of the autopsy, because I think we can follow through unless Andy has some questions on the bullet locations. Do you recall the photographs that were taken at the time?
No, I remember them. And there again, that's very cloudy. I remember taking photographs, but I don't remember at what time or what point during the autopsy. No idea.
Remember what they did with the photographs?
Absolutely not. I wasn't concerned about them. Never entered my mind to even ask. I might point out at this time that Sam Bird, the other lieutenant that I'm talking about, I could kick myself 3 times for not doing it. We had a lot of documented records that had to do with the funeral itself. Planning it, and the old guard, and the presidents, and the kings, and the queens, and who all were there, and every step of the record. I've got a lot of those records at home. The newspapers with my picture on the front page all over the country, and, during the funeral, and stuff like that. But I do remember, right after this was all over, this started on a Friday night and ended on when we buried him on Monday afternoon. And I remember, like Tuesday night or Wednesday night, one night that week, sitting in Sam's apartment while Sam made a recording of everything he had seen and done from the start of the funeral, from the time Kennedy was assassinated till the time they buried him. For his own personal records, I could kick myself for not doing the same thing. But I remember him.
That was on the Wednesday or
Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night after the autopsy. The autopsy was on the Friday night.
Right.
I can remember we left after the autopsy. Everybody left. I sat there with Sam. We were both in and out at that time. While they did the funeral people did put Kennedy back together, and we got him dressed. That took almost as long as the autopsy. And it was sometimes in the very early hours of the morning now, and I've got that documented. I remember that at home. That's really not that important, I guess. It was sometimes between 3 and 4 in the morning when we finally finished, and we put the body back into the hearse, and Mrs. Kennedy, Jackie, came down and got in the hearse with the body herself. Still had on the pink suit, hadn't changed clothes. And we let it, our car, General Wheel, and myself, and our driver were the first car. And then if I'm not mistaken, there was a police car in front of us. And then the hearse right behind us. And family car behind that, and 1 or 2 other cars in the procession. We went back to the White House. We drove up, went into the White House, parked, because we had all this arranged. It had to be very formalized now. Mrs. Kennedy and the hearse with the body stopped at the entrance to the White House. We called, I'll never forget this, we called the Marine Barracks, which was across the river in Virginia. 20 minutes before we left the hospital. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. It might have been 15 minutes, but it was between 15 and 20 minutes before we left Bethesda. We called them, told them we wanted an honor guard at the White House to lead the body up the entrance drive to the White House, and then to make a cordon as the old guard got the body out of the hearse and carried it into the White House. They woke those boys up out of a dead sleep, the Marines. They dressed them in formal attire, got their guns, put them on rifles, put them on a bus, and they were at the White House before we were. And they stopped out front. They had the Marines lined up on both sides of the driveway, and then they had a group of them marching in front of the hearse, and then they went very slowly up and into the White House. We got the body out, took it in the White House, and went to the East Room, if I remember correctly. And at that time, they had a priest there, and it was Bobby Kennedy, Jackie, the White House servants, one or two other people, and General Wheel and myself, and then they had a little private service. Had a little, funeral service that lasted 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But that picture was in a double-page spread because it ended up, they had a photographer in there, and that picture ended up in there were no other news people allowed in there, so the only thing I can recollect is it must have been an official photograph, because that ended up as a double-page spread picture in Life magazine. Once again, that doesn't have anything to do with what you're trying to find out, I'm sure, but...
Remember whether Sam Bird discussed the details of the autopsy on this tape?
That's why I said, no, I don't. I do remember Sam making the tape, and I remember him asking me questions about people and who was there. We was trying to authenticate it as best possible. And as far as I can remember, when I came in his room, he had been making the tape. I was not present when he discussed the autopsy part of it on his tape. I'm not sure he put it on tape, but I know for a fact that he made a tape recording of everything, his part in the whole thing. And to that point, if he did put it on tape about the autopsy, since we were in there and basically saw the exact same thing, that tape would be a hell of a lot more valuable to you than my testimony.
Is Sam Bird, is he still alive today?
I have no idea. I haven't talked to Sam since the day I left Washington. I left Washington and I think it was around this time in 1974.
Is he still stationed there?
Yeah, he was still stationed there when I left. I imagine he stayed there for tour of duty. So, matter of fact, General Wheel asked Sam, Sam and I got to be very close friends. We lived right across from each other at Fort Myer in the officers' BOQ. And Sam and I were very good friends. Sam had been a general's aide at his previous station. And when I left Washington, General Wheel got me to ask Sam if Sam would replace me as General Wheel's aide. And Sam said he'd been a general's aide once, and that he felt he needed a tour of duty on his records instead of another general aide's position, just so that he could see, rank faster. I don't know if he stayed in the Army, whether he got out of the Army, but he was a permanent type. So to the best of my knowledge, Sam Bird's probably still in the Army. If he's alive, and I certainly hope he is. He's a fine person.
In the early stages of the autopsy, before they formally began the cutting, who was running things?
I can't tell you. The doctors went there, and one doctor was obviously directing the procedures, and I don't know which one it was.
Was the doctor directing the procedures the one who participated in the autopsy?
Yes.
Did the autopsy surgeons discuss with anyone else the type of autopsy they were going to perform?
Not during the autopsy, no.
Remember any discussions prior to the autopsy?
I wasn't with them prior to the autopsy. They were there when we got there.
From the time that you arrived until they were into the autopsy, do you remember the autopsy surgeon discussing the nature of the autopsy with anyone?
I'm sure they must have, but I'm not sure they must have. No, I'm sure they must have discussed it among themselves. Whether they discussed it with anybody else or the chief of surgery of the hospital, I'm sure they probably did. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I can't make any comment on that because I don't know.
Did they have any discussions with anyone else during the autopsy?
No, not to my knowledge.
Were you in a position to be able to hear the conversations among the doctors? Yeah,
I was, but truthfully, I wouldn't. I paid attention to what I wanted to pay attention to. It was one of those deals where I was just curious how many times he'd been shot or where he was shot. But the medical definitions of what type of wounds they were and whatever it is, I tuned all that out probably. I didn't know what they were talking about, and I probably could have, at the time, I just didn't really care. I should have cared more, and I wish now I'd have taped it, if possible, but no, I really don't know. I heard their conversations, and I was interested in the parts that I guess I wanted to be interested in. It's been too long to recollect any details of other parts of their conversation.
In terms of feet, how close were you to the table when the autopsy was being performed? Were you right behind people?
When you walk into the autopsy room, from the back door where they brought the body in, you turn left, went down a very little short hallway, had the doors right there where you went in. When you walk in, there was almost like a little spectator's gallery. Mm-hmm. On the right, there were several chairs on the right with a sort of a railing in front of them. Mm-hmm. And then the table was right out in front of that. I would say I was as far from here to that jacket, maybe, from the doctors, approximately 12 to 15 feet. I can remember commenting when they laid him up on the table, this has nothing to do with anything. He was a beautiful physical specimen. I mean, you could, not an ounce of fat on his body anyhow, anywhere. Very muscular. A great looking physical shape. And I also remember how, obviously, a dead, deceased person does, but he looked much smaller laying there on the table than he ever did in person. I saw him quite a bit. He just looked smaller. Mm-hmm. But he was just physical condition looked fantastic. You just couldn't see any fat or sloppiness or anything.
When the autopsy doctors first walked up to the table, did they thoroughly look over the body? Or did they begin concentrating on one area and begin to work there?
No, first thing they did was look over the body. I can remember that. They looked over head to toe, all sides, just looked at the whole thing. And they discussed a lot of things, and that's probably part I tuned out. But, I do remember looking over it thoroughly. I do remember the body still was covered with blood, and I remember cleaning it off, I remember a brush, looked like a scrub brush, and cleaning the body in certain areas before they started cutting. I remember after they finished the scrubbing him down again, getting all the mess away and everything. But I remember they had to scrub and clean it pretty good after they did all the preliminary looking they wanted to before, I guess, they physically touched the body and got to work on it. They had to clean the body quite a bit before they started.
Did the doctors in that preliminary examination find all of the wounds that you described?
I'm sure they must have, yes. I mean, they were visible. So.
To follow that up, the wounds that you did describe, was that based on hearing the doctors point out that this is a wound, this is a wound, or was that based on your visible sight that you saw the body?
Both, because I could see the body, I could see the rear, I could see obviously the side of the face, although that's just when I walked in, they took him out of the casket, I saw that, the side wound, because when I went back and sat down, they laid him down, and the way they laid him, I was looking at the left side of his body, as opposed to the right side of his body. And I can remember seeing the blood in the throat area, and in the neck area. As far as me getting down and looking at the exit hole at the front, all I could see was the blood. What I'm talking about is what I heard in conversation from them from then on.
Well, just to follow that up, as you well know, because I take it you do hunt a lot, locating wounds in hair is very difficult just by sighting.
Yeah.
Now, did you visibly see the wounds in the back of the head and what you feel the entrance wounds?
No.
Is that based on what the doctor stated that point A?
No. I hope I'm not contradicting myself. But at this point, and there again, like I said, it's been a long time, I feel that there was no really entrance room. Maybe I said that in the rear of his head. There was a point where they determined the bullet entered the back of his head. But I believe all of that part of his head was gone. I mean, I think it just physically blew away that part of his head. Just like a strip right across there. Or it may have been just in that area. It just blew it out.
So you're saying the damage caused by the entrance and the exit of the bullet to the head caused one large hole?
To the best of my recollection, yes, it did. The one that went in the back of the other ones that went in the back of the neck. Like I said, I saw the blood spots and what have you, but they weren't weren't a blow away like this. But of course, what little I know about it, which isn't a hell of a lot, when your bone is right there, so when it hit it, the bullet probably expanded, hit something solid and ripped. Where here, it went in to tissue before it hit anything.
Was there any discussion of the nature of the bullet which caused the hit?
No. To my recollection, no, there wasn't.
Was there any discussion that it would take a certain kind of bullet to cause that kind of damage?
If it was done, it was probably, I'm thinking it was probably done in the privacy of the doctors after the autopsy. I don't remember, and I'm sure it must have been mentioned during the autopsy, but I'm not going to say yes or no because I don't have any idea. I don't remember that at all.
During the autopsy, did you discuss with anyone else in the room the nature of the head or the causes of it?
No, not really. Sam and I were just talking, talked about different things. We were talking about Kennedy and talked about how many times he had been shot. But I don't think we ever discussed anything in relation to what the doctors were saying about the wounds.
Could you describe for us the nature of the damage in the front of the neck?
No, I really couldn't, because like I say, when we got it out, blood was all over the body. It was just almost caked on. That's like I remember him taking a scrub brush and a pail, one of his arms, and if I'm not mistaken, it was his left arm. The way, I guess, after he died and finished the autopsy by the time rigor mortis had set in, one of his arms was slightly higher. If you know when a guy's laying down, one arm was up a little bit. So when they started the autopsy, I can remember one of the doctors, when he was starting to clean the body up, physically got up on the table and put his knee down on his arm to hold it down so that he could scrub the rest, get it out of his way so he could scrub the rest of the body. So to describe the whole to you, no, because it was so messy and so much blood that I never got close enough to get out, and look at the wound itself.
Well, can you give us a rough estimate? Compare it, for example, to the wound in the head and the wound in the back.
No, it was much smaller. Oh, very much smaller.
Than the head wound?
Than the side head wound.
How would it compare to the wound in the lower back?
There again, the wound in the back of the head, all I saw of that wound was when they turned him over on his side and saw the blood when they were cleaning him off and when they started cutting and doing the thing. I just couldn't possibly describe to you the relation to size. I don't remember. And I doubt that I saw it close enough to remember, to describe it to you.
Do you remember the doctors describing the wound in the front of the neck as being caused by anything other than a bullet?
No, no.
Remember the discussion as to whether or not there was a tracheotomy incision?
No, I guess anything, I do remember something about that, but I think that, if I remember, I think that would have to come after reading things about what went on in Dallas. I don't know, honestly, just don't remember discussing that.
Okay, what have you read about Dallas, about that front neck?
It's been so long. Like I say, that I'm glad I haven't. I'm glad I didn't go back over any articles or read, because I don't even remember. I don't remember.
You don't recall whether or not there was a tracheotomy incision?
Absolutely not.
Well, you say you didn't hear the doctors discuss that. Did you explicitly hear the doctors say that the wound in the front of the neck was caused by a bullet?
If you want to get down to specifics, no. The only thing I do remember was when they kept talking about the entrance in the back of the neck and looking at the hole in the front of the neck. To the best of my knowledge, they were convinced that a bullet came out of the front of the neck. And that's how they were determining where to look for the other bullet, by the angle it went in at the back and came out at the front, where to look at the other one.
Oh, the angle where it came in the head,
right,
came out the front of the neck. They're
right,
using that angle
to determine where to look for the bullet for the other one, because I presume that from what they were looking at, both entrances looked to be the same. In other words, both entrances looked like, the angles were the same on both entrances, or the size of the hole probably was the same. And in the front, I'm not going to stand here and make up a story, make it sound good. I just don't remember whether they discussed the size of the tracheotomy hole or it in relation to where a bullet might have exited.
How much time would you say, relatively speaking, did the doctors spend on the three wounds you described? Did they spend more time on one or the other of the wounds?
They spent more time looking for that other bullet than they did anything else.
You described the bullet that went in.
On the lower part of the neck, I remember saying it must have hit the chest cavity and ricocheted down somewhere into the body.
Do you remember any discussion?
And they spent a lot of time on that. Because I remember when they cut him open the front, I remember, now let's look for this, let's look for this. When they took all the organs out, they went through and cut the organs up looking for bullets. And finally, to the best of my knowledge, and I remember this. I don't remember how much more they did after this. I remember them saying, that bullet could be anywhere. It could have gone right down to his heel or his toe. It could have ricocheted and just traveled right on down through the bottom of his, through his insides.
Do you remember any discussion among the doctors as to whether the bullet was entered in the lower part of the neck, lower back part of the neck, exited from the front of the neck?
Yeah, well, I remember they were firmly convinced it did not.
Okay. So you're convinced.
That's why they spent so much time looking for it. They traced it through the back of his neck, through, when they did the autopsy, through the inside of his body, and there was where the bullet was then where it should have exited, it was not. And at the angle it was traveling, and from, the other things they saw visible in the chest area once they cut him open, it had started down, but where was it?
When they opened up the body from the front, were they able to discern any part of the track of the bullet?
I'm convinced they were in the upper part of his body, yes, because that's how they started following him. And then I think is when they started taking the organs out, and one at a time, they took all of his insides out. I remember that. Boy, they had 4 or 5 piles of insides laying up on the table, and they thoroughly examined each one of those. And, they just had a big hollow chest and stomach cavity that left, or particularly chest cavity, when they got through. And, so I'm very convinced in my own mind that they were very convinced that bullet was somewhere in him.
when they
because you know, from their conversation, they tracked the bullet as far as they could in a downward position before they could tell where it went. That's when they started taking organs apart and looking wherever they could look without going ahead and just cutting him apart. And I think their decision finally was, we're just not going to cut him, you know, take every, you know, completely dissect him to find the bullet. To them, obviously, at that point, it wasn't that important.
When they opened up the chest, and you say they saw part of the track of the bullet,
yeah.
Did they take a photograph?
Can't tell. Don't know. Honestly, don't know.
Let me ask you this. Did they take all the photographs at the beginning, or did they take some during the course of the autopsy?
Once again, I don't know. Just don't know.
Do you remember you expressed that you said that the doctors considered the possibility that the bullet could be virtually anywhere in the body, including, I think the word you mentioned was as far as the heel.
Right.
Do you remember whether or not the doctors
I remember one of the doctors saying, you know, I've seen a guy shot, something to the effect, you know, I've seen bullet wounds where it hit bone and ricocheted all over the body. And he says, we may never find this bullet unless we take the whole body apart.
Do you remember whether they x-rayed the lower extremities?
Do you recall if they were using the x-rays at the same time that they were dissecting?
Do you remember the doctors looking at the x-rays in the autopsy room?
That I do. I remember him looking at them. And that must have been, you're jogging my memory now, because I do remember him looking at x-rays at the beginning of the autopsy. So they must have taken some, you know, at the very beginning, because I remember relating x-rays to things they were doing.
Do you remember which portion of the x-rays?
No. I will plead dumbness on that, but I just don't. But I remember now. I remember, you know, holding the things up, man. They were pinning them up on a big long thing in a series with lights, and they would examine a part of an X-ray and they'd go on from there. So obviously, that they must have taken X-rays right at the beginning. Now, if they took any more during or after, I don't remember.
Do you remember any of the autopsy doctors arriving at the autopsy later than the others?
No, I don't.
Do you remember any of the autopsy doctors probing any of the wounds?
No, I really can't say. They were doing everything, so I don't. I can say they must have. I'm not going to say they did. I remember that, that the wounds and looking for the bullet were their primary concern. Yes. That's all right. Don't worry about it.
Do you remember any discussion when they were trying to find out where the bullet went of the possibility that the bullet had gone in the back and had fallen out of the body? In other words, had not exited or remained in the body.
No, that was no possibility because there were no other holes. It could have fallen out.
That's what I mean. Did they discuss
to the rear? It
fell out of the entrance.
No.
The bullet.
The bullet had penetrated. The bullet went in the skin. It had penetrated. There was evidence of it inside of his body, and so there was no way it could have fallen out.
Was there any discussion of the possibility that because of external cardiac massage from the front when he was face up, the bullet could have worked its way out?
No discussion of that I can ever remember. No.
Do you remember any phone calls anyone in the autopsy room made?
In the room, you mean?
Anyone in the room or anyone from the room leaving to make any calls to you?
I made a call. I don't remember anybody else.
From the room?
No, not from the room. When the autopsy was over, before the men from the funeral home started their work, they took a break. General Wheel went in there. I came in and said, "You want to go out for a while? I'll relieve you." General Wheel came in the room, I went out of the room, took 10 or 15 minutes, and called my parents. And said, guess where I am? Well, what I just did. I woke them up. It was then after 2 in the morning. And they said, what? I said, I just watched Kennedy's autopsy. And, they got all excited and said, yeah, we saw you on television this afternoon, at Andrews Air Force Base and all of that. And I said, well, we're going to participate to a much greater extent in the funeral. Watch television, you'll see me. Typical, I guess, 21-year-old's reaction. And that was the sum total of my conversation with my parents. I didn't discuss anything about anything. All I just told them is I'd just been in there watching all things. And if anybody else called, I don't know.
Do you remember any messages being sent into the room from the Kennedy family or anybody with the Kennedys?
No. None.
Do you remember Admiral Berkeley being present at the autopsy?
Everybody, to my knowledge, in that room, besides Sam Bird and myself, had on a medical gown. And so, if he was...
Just a minute. The time is now 12:38.
Yeah,
I just want to know what happened.
Yeah.
Richard Lipsey Page just ran out and considered a moment.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Real quick, let me just check this. All right. If there was anybody else, it's 20 minutes to 1. I'm starting again. If there was anybody else in the room, Admiral or who, he was dressed as a doctor and not as an officer that I can recollect. So I don't remember if he was in the room or not. No, I don't.
Do you know who Admiral Berkeley is or was at the time?
I don't remember his name.
Do you remember meeting with physician to the president?
No, I don't think I ever did.
Who else do you remember was in the room?
I can remember, like I say, I don't whether he was a doctor or orderly or whatever. There was at times other people in there helping him clean the body, move the body, do certain things like that. And occasionally somebody would just come in the room, turn around and walk out, one of the hospital staff type people. But I don't remember who it was. No, I don't remember by name anybody else in the room.
Well, do you recall anyone else who seemed to be fulfilling the role you were, an observer, but not actually involved in assisting the doctors in any capacity?
Well, that's hard because I seem to recollect one other person in there on occasion, but for the life of me, honestly, I can't remember who it was. I really don't. Sam and I were sitting to try to be out of the doctor's way and everybody else's way. Immediately, away from the table, but right there in the chairs as you walk in on the right. I just don't remember the other people that came in around at that time.
Were you in charge of the security arrangements for the autopsy room?
Specifically, no. I was charged by General Wheel to make sure that nobody left, that body didn't go anywhere without him or me. And as far as specific security of the room on the outside, I remember they had guards all up and down that place. And Army people, and all types of security people. And I don't know who physically was responsible for hospital security.
Do you remember what orders, if any, were given regarding who could be admitted to the autopsy room?
No, I probably wasn't around to be admitted. I had on my uniform with the general's recognition, and the general and I drove up, and everybody realized he was in charge, and he told me to stay with the body, and from then on, nobody ever asked me anything. So, but there was a guard right outside the door, a policeman, a Washington policeman right outside the door.
Do you remember anyone, in effect, taking attendance of who was present, circulating a list? Did you
No.
have to sign your name to?
No, I don't. I do not. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't, but I don't remember.
Getting back to the organs, you said that they removed the organs from the body and placed them up on a table, a stainless steel table.
It was right over the body. No,
Shelving.
Just shelving up over the body. And I remember it had water draining over it continuously.
Now, you also mentioned that they examined these closely and also cut them up to some degree.
Yeah.
Now, did they return some of these organs or all the organs to the body at the termination of the autopsy? Or do you recollect?
To the best of my knowledge, they didn't return anything to the body. That they had these organs in separate containers.
Mm-hmm.
After they examined them. What they did, I left for a while when General Will came in to spell me. And when I went back, we started working on, not we, but a few people started, cleaning him up and cosmetically fixing him up. I don't remember what happened to those organs.
Specifically, do you recall if the brain was one of these organs?
Yes. Because I remember him cutting the top of his head off, and I remember him I could see him taking everything out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only point in the autopsy that I got a little queasy. I remember they made a little circular cut on the top of his head, lifted his scalp off, and started taking the things out inside of his head.
Do you remember what they put the brain in?
No, I don't.
Remember them taking any metal fragments out of the president's body?
Specifically, no, I don't.
Do you recall if they did take any metal fragments? Maybe if you don't remember specifically where, did they take any metal fragments at all?
I would hope Sam could remember and put those down on his tape. I feel like they did.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to sit here and say what part of the body they took them from or what they were. But I feel like they did have some bullet fragments.
Mm-hmm.
I remember very carefully examining the area, around the part on the top of his head, side of his head, where it was kind of blown away. I remember just very extremely carefully examining that part of his, of his head and looking for things.
Mm-hmm.
But though I'm not going to sit here and tell you, they took a big piece or a little piece out. Sorry, I just don't remember.
Okay, I have a sketch here from the autopsy face sheet. We'd like you to place, you can do it first in pencil and then in pen if you like, or just in pen. Place the locations of any wounds that you recall.
Okay.
This sketch is a blank drawing of a body, a male body.
And like I said, to the best of my knowledge, somewhere in that area, and then, like in that area.
Okay, could you label them as whether they're points of entrance or exit?
All right. Heart blown away. Entrance. And entrance. To the best of my, let's be the right side of his face. That area in there, once again, was kind of blown away.
Okay. Is that area the same area?
Same area. Same.
So it's
blown away.
Continuity.
Same area. And there was a hole. Now that talk about tracheotomy or bullet, as far as I was concerned, in my recollection, they talked about it as a bullet hole.
Okay, could you label
Exit.
it?
Exit.
Okay. Could you put the date and your signature? Do you recall anyone in the room taking notes?
Not around us. No, I don't. I do recall the doctors had like a chart sheet. I don't remember what was on it. I really didn't get that close and look at it. But, like a clipboard with papers on it and making notes as they went along.
Do you remember the presence of any federal agents in the room?
No, I don't.
When did you finish your duties?
Excuse me. There was one other person. Like I say, I'm just trying to remember. To the best of my recollection, everybody was dressed in a surgical gown, whatever you call it, around the table. But there may have been one other person, whether it was the admiral, the chief surgeon, or a federal agent. And there was another person around the table at times that wasn't doing anything, was observing. And he could have been one of the doctors. But I do remember another person, but I couldn't tell you more about it than the man in the moon.
When did your service as General Wheels aid end?
When I got out of the service, which was January of 74.
Did you help make the arrangements for reinterment?
January? Excuse me, let me just see. I'm trying to get my dates straight. Yeah, that must have been January of 74, right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you, in a similar capacity, participate in the reinterment of the President's body?
Yeah, I helped him pick up the President's body and lay it in the casket.
No, I'm talking about subsequent to the funeral in 1963. I'm talking about years later.
Oh, I haven't. This is the first time I've discussed it. What I'm discussing with you, this is...
No, you misunderstand my question. As you may recall, they hadn't finished the final resting place.
Oh, I'm sorry.
At Arlington
National Cemetery. When I left Washington, he was still buried where the little gas light was on the side of the hill.
So you do not recall him being moved into the permanent site, which was very close to the original site. You did not participate in that?
No, I didn't.
Do you know if General Wheel did?
Obviously, he must have, yes. Because General Wheel was, if it was within the length of span, he was still in service, and he was still there for, I know, well over a year, about there, after I left.
Was he there in after?
General Wheel was there every time anybody did anything of a formal nature, and I'm sure that was a very formal thing. General Wheel was always there.
But you don't specifically recall when it occurred?
No, I really don't.
Is there anything else about the autopsy or the evidence which came from the autopsy that you can recall, or about the people that were present?
The only thing, and there, once again, and I'm sorry, but the best I can tell you is pure my recollection after all these years, and obviously some speculation on my part. The only thing, and you're certainly not going to hold up under any court of law type thing, but I can remember when the Warren Commission was formed, everybody was writing books about it. And all the comments on how many times he was shot and the angles it was coming on. I remember Walter Cronkite doing a big CBS thing on who shot him, how many directions it came from. I can remember vividly in my mind on literally hundreds of occasions saying, these people are crazy. I watched the autopsy, and I know for a fact he was shot 3 times. He was shot 3 times, and that the doctors were firmly convinced they all came out of the same gun because of the type of wounds or the entrances, whatever. And that, I wish I could be more specific going back to the autopsy. It's just been too long to remember things, but I can remember immediately thereafter, the next week, the next month, and I was out of the service within a 3-month period. But over the period of the next year or so, which was when I really remembered what went on in the room. And I can remember in my own mind saying, hey, these people are crazy. They're trying to read something into it that didn't happen. one report came out he was shot in 3 different angles, and another report came out he was only shot once, and another report came out he was shot 7 times, and all everybody had their own version of what happened and how many sounds they heard and the angles of the fire that came from. But I definitely remember the doctors commenting they were convinced that the shots came from the same direction and from the same type of weapon, and it was 3 shots.
Did they also feel that did the doctors state that 3 separate bullets had struck?
This is one other thing that, to the best of my memory today, and remembering what I thought about when all of these reports came out, absolutely unequivocally, yes, they were convinced that he had been shot 3 times.
It's unclear to me from the sketch that you did where there are 3 bullets.
One on the right part of his head,
okay,
one on the upper part of his neck,
right,
and one on the lower part of his neck.
Well, on your sketch, you label 2 points as points of entrance.
Yeah, and one part was just blown away.
Right.
This part was just blown away.
So you...
I don't remember whether... I just cannot remember whether there was a point of entrance and then the blown away part, or whether it, like, he must have been sitting like this and hit like this, and went in and then blew that away, or whether it just ripped the whole section away.
Well, either of those 2 possibilities means 1 bullet to the head.
Right, 1 bullet to the head.
Okay.
And then 1 bullet to the lower head.
Oh, where did that bullet exit?
That's the bullet that exited right here.
Throat.
Then the lower entrance that did not exit. If it's confusing, ask me again. We'll go over it. Do you understand what I'm talking about,
yeah.
Mark?
Yeah.
One bullet right on his head. In other words, the bullets were coming.
The question is, the bullet that you're referring to, this is the upper right-hand side of the head, did this wound, which you describe as a large blasting out, say that, did that have a separate corresponding entrance wound, or
that's
did the doctors believe that was all part of the wound?
That was all part of one wound.
Could it have been part of that lower wound on the head which you labeled?
No, absolutely not. Oh, no, absolutely not.
Because earlier when earlier when I asked you about the blown away portion, I got the impression that when you were saying you weren't sure whether it entered and then blew away a portion, or whether the entrance and the exit were all part of one hole.
You're right, I wasn't, but this was distinctly another wound beside in relation to these 2.
Well, I guess the question would be, did the doctors conclude that there were 2 separate wounds, but there was a track between the 2 of them?
No, the doctors, the conclusion from the doctors were that there were 3 separate wounds.
And 3 separate bullets?
And 3 separate bullets. No question in my mind about that.
Could you...
Can I ask you a question at this point?
You can ask this, but we may not be able to answer it for you.
Oh, I think this would be just a very simple question that you could answer, but it's got to be something to do with it. Why don't they exhume the body and study the body?
Well, that's a question we can't answer.
You can't answer that?
And that's a policy judgment.
Yeah, okay, it's a policy judgment, but I mean, that's got to clear up a lot of things. I just can't imagine why they just don't. I remember I remember the discussion that Lyndon Johnson said, this body, none of the details of the Warren report, and this body will not be touched for, 15, 20 years or whatever? I remember, he came out in public, and made that statement.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember, I'm just curious why they don't dig him up if they're so vitally concerned about it instead of wasting you guys' time.
On this sketch, could you add a further identification where you say part blown away?
Okay, part blown away.
That's the source of my confusion.
Wound number 1. Okay. Entrance of bullet number 2. And entrance of bullet number 3.
Okay, When you say wound number 1, why don't you say...
that to you represents entrance.
That to me represents
number 1.
Well, not in sequence. I mean, the bullet number 1 may have been this bullet. That may have been number 2. That may have been, I don't remember the sequence.
For purposes of marking this paper, that could be the entrance and exit of.
Right. Wound number. Yeah. Entrance and exit.
And we'll label it number 1.
Entrance and exit of bullet wound number 1. This would be entrance of bullet number 2, entrance of bullet number 3, not in order.
Okay, just for identification.
For identification. This same area blown away as
wound number 1.
Wound number 1, exit point of wound number 2.
Okay. Now, let me ask you to clear up. I think we stated this explicitly before, but the point on the sketch labeled as entrance of bullet number 2, did you, in fact, see that hole?
All I saw was when they turned him over on his side. We took him out with the box coffin that they brought him from the hospital. He was laying on his back. They laid him on the table. When I saw it was when they turned him over to the side, and I saw it from a distance of 20 feet, 15 feet, and I saw the big blood area. I did not get any closer look at the hole than that. Yeah, I did hear their comments that, here's where the bullet went in.
Okay, so what you're basing that on then is the comment of the doctor.
And what I could see, what I could see relatively from where I was sitting about the position of it, yes.
So essentially the doctors said that there were 2 bullet wounds to the head. Is that correct?
Not really, not considering whether you want to consider this a head or a neck wound. I consider it more of a neck wound, and I believe in their discussions they discussed it more of a neck wound than a head wound. This was I consider my wound number 1 as the head wound.
Okay.
I consider this wound number 2 on a upper neck, lower part of your head.
Was it in the hair? In the hairline?
Yeah, it was in the hairline, the lower hairline.
It was in the hair.
Oh, wait. I'm considering where my hair is today. Like I say, it was just a blood smash area back there. It could have been, in the part that you sort of shave right up there. But, lower head still, but upper neck. And then the third one was definitely in the lower neck part, upper vertebrae. Are y'all going to try to draw conclusions after you've done your thing for a couple of years? Or are you just going to bound it up and keep it for future reference?
The committee will issue a report. That's it. We'll make public.
Are you, so, if I can ask you this, so you're concerned more, obviously, with just talking to me and other people about the autopsy and whatever. Your investigation, I presume, covers the whole realm of the assassination.
We're investigating the assassination generally.
Yeah. General, conspiracy, whatever. You're investigating the whole thing. Obviously, I know nothing about that. But I was just curious. I guess everybody in the world has been curious since Oswald was killed and then Ruby was killed. There's something rotten in Denmark, obviously, somewhere. I don't know that it will ever find it.
Before proceeding away from the issue of the location of wounds, do you have any further questions pertaining to you?
Do you remember whether or not during the autopsy any skull fragments were brought into the room?
No, I don't think they were. I think I might have remembered if they'd have brought any other parts of the body in there. I don't remember that at all.
I have one question pertaining to pre-autopsy. How did you determine that the autopsy would be performed Thursday?
We were told where to take the body to. We got back to our office. It was about 1 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. We immediately called the White House and talked to our liaison officer, or whoever happened to be at that time. General Wheel spoke with him at length. Then we whipped out the whole plan where you start planning funerals, what needs to be done in Washington. And then it was communicated to us, there would be an autopsy formed, and then when we first got the word, I think they said they would perform it in Dallas. And then somebody up in the chain of command, at the White House, or on some higher level than us, said, no, not in Dallas. We can do it in Washington, and then where? And it was decided that it was to be done at the Naval Station, designated station. I can remember this side comment, never been so frightened in my life. When we took off from Andrews Air Force Base, it was in one of those, and I forget the number of it, you may or may not remember, old banana-shaped helicopters, those long, they were shaped like a banana with a rotor on each end, huge things, held about 30 to 40 people. And they had the reputation of being not very safe. And I can remember we loaded that thing up, and it was pitch black dark, obviously, outside. I just happen to remember, because I flew in and out of Washington a lot, all those planes that used to land at National. Every 30 seconds there's a plane landed. And I can remember taking off from that damn thing and flying across Washington. And everything entered my mind imaginable. It was loaded. We had all of the honor guard in the plane with us. All the seats were taken up. And we had 2 lieutenants flying the plane who were younger than I was. And I was young. And I was scared to death. Yes. Yeah, he'll just have to wait. No, I don't have it here. I don't have anything here. No, Pat doesn't have any on. No. If you'd like to. It's not going to be too much longer. And I can remember being frightened flying across there, just in that damn plane, pitch black outside, and wondering, who was telling the other planes that there was some helicopters flying over Washington. Then we went to land at the hospital. They have a helipad, or, a pad there where the helicopters land. And in numbers, I don't know, you can read it in the paper, but there looked to be like several thousand people on the ground, and we got right over them, and there was no place to land. And I can remember looking out the window of this helicopter and seeing the police forcing the people back. This little helipad was lighted up, and they got the crowd back far enough so we could set that helicopter down. Now, if the wind had been blowing strongly one way or the other, or he had slipped 1/4 of an inch, that plane would have tilted 1/8 of an inch one way or the other, exaggerating, of course, we would have cut off 4,000 people's heads. I've never been so frightened. And we landed, that little kid landed, and he was a kid, landed that helicopter right in the middle of this humongous crowd. And I know he had to be scared to death too, because there was no room for margin of error when he'd set that helicopter down. Because 3 feet one way or the other, and he'd have been in the crowd. And I just never, I've flown all my life. I've been in storms. I've been in a tornado in an airplane.
And I've had all Delta Airlines.
Yeah, I fly so doggone much. They gave it to me for flying the airline so much. But I've been scared in airplanes before, so I guess everybody has. But I've never been frightened like that in my life. I just had visions of landing that helicopter and those people. And, oh, God, that was frightening.
I have one last question. After the autopsy, as you mentioned, some of the materials were retained from the body, physical evidence, and we also had photographs and x-rays.
I don't know, General Wheel never saw him, to my knowledge, and I never saw him.
So you had no further
We had
responsibilities for custody of those materials?
none whatsoever. None whatsoever. Our obligation as far as the autopsy ended right there. And I'm not sure we had any obligation for the autopsy except General Wheel. We were responsible for the funeral and for General Wheel, and he wanted somebody there to make sure that nobody carted that body off until he could get back there, until everything was taken to the White House. You know, he said, "You stay here and watch it." I'm sorry I couldn't be any more help to you. It's been a long time, and like I say, I just know, the 3 entrance wounds. And that's the only thing I really remember vividly, particularly because of my listening to comments, immediately after all these reports started coming out, and obviously I really wasn't interested in autopsy. Quite frankly, I was more interested in looking at the features of the man and at the time, and really planning the funeral. I was more anxious at the time to be upstairs with General Wheel, seeing what the plans were, than I was sitting in that room. And that's the best I can tell you. Obviously, everything I've told you here. First of all, I have never discussed any part of the autopsy itself with anybody. You're the first who I've ever discussed it with, not even with my wife. And the thing, as far as relating back to the thing I signed, that had to do at the time with national security more, because I had a top secret rating, because I was exposed to every top secret document in Washington when I briefed the president or with General Wheel on things. And of course that's what, it had more to do with, when we signed those, that we wouldn't discuss, I feel like it wouldn't discuss anything that we knew that related to the president, of his dealings, or at the time what any of his plans were, or any of the people he had talked to in confidentiality, or anything that I had read going from our office to his office. But still, I felt that this was something that if anybody should be told about it, it should be told to authorized persons such as yourself. And for that reason, and General Wheel and I kind of agreed we should never discuss it, among ourselves. And it's never been discussed with anybody. And I certainly would not want my comments made public. I don't think it should be.
Okay, you have the card that Andy gave you.
Yeah,
that has the committee address and also telephone number, so if you need to contact us, you can call collect.
I appreciate it. If I think of anything else, I'll certainly be glad to tell you, but that's why I never got real excited and called anybody to tell them anything to come see me, because I really, the most exciting part of mine was my part in it was dealing with all the kings and the queens and the presidents that came and getting to meet them all. Of course, that's what we did all the time. I got to meet, I think I got them all written down, 62 kings or queens or presidents of foreign countries, while I was working in the White House and for General Wheel. And it was just a heck of an exciting experience while we were there. We were in charge of, if you remember, the March on Washington in August of that year. That was another really exciting thing. And that's all right. We got to do so many exciting things, but more ours were function type exciting things. And of course, being the funeral, we started this thing Friday at noon and didn't go to bed till Monday night. Went back to our room just to change clothes.
I'm going to terminate the tape at this time. It is now 1:13.